off. It's Friday afternoon. Welcome to 2016 Agrifoods and Garden Show. Cuisine Consulting is happy to be back for another year. We've been doing this for it's our 7th year now. We always love coming here and cooking for everybody. We've got some great lineup of recipes this year. And those will all be handed out in the book, and it'll include this recipe that we're about to do now, which is potato bread. So our focus is root vegetables, eggs, milk, things that are agriculture, that are produced in this province, and we try to do simple, interesting things with them that you can take home and give a try. So everyone's had bread. We all love bread. Newfoundlanders, we can't get enough of it. We eat it all day long. So that combined with molasses, another thing that we all love. We're going to make potato bread, and we're going to do molasses butter. All right, so we're going to take you through that step by step. So are you guys familiar with making bread? Who's made bread here? You've all made bread? Perfect. A lot of explaining I won't have to do then. Now, do you guys have KitchenAid mixer? I brought this because I can do it in this or I can do it by hand. I figured I'd let you guys decide which one you'd rather me go with. I mean, you like the KitchenAid? Okay. All right, so when it comes to potato bread, one of the first things you got to do is boil potato and rice it. And if you don't have a ricer, just put it in a pan that's got a wide base and mash it really well. What you want to try to do is get the chunks out, all right? Because you're not going to add any butter to the potato, or definitely want salt in your water. But what you want is that kind of really soft, I don't know if you can get a sense of that in the mirror, but it's just a really soft, kind of silky potato, all right? So any chunks you want to try to avoid to get out. And it's not, if you have a few chunks, not the end of the world, okay? So you basically, boiling water, salt it. What kind of potato? You definitely don't, listen, you can use any kind of potato. People say that a starch potato is what you should use for mashed, but you can use a Yukon, you can use a yellow potato. I mean, it's about potato. The ultimate goal is that you just want to boil it in salted water and get it into a fine mash. That's the objective. And that becomes another ingredient in your bread, okay? So as you all know, when you're doing bread, one of the things that you got to start with is you got to activate your yeast. Let me just get squared away here. Never mind, I'll do this. So the first thing we want to do is activate our yeast. Now, yeast is a bit tricky. You don't want it too hot, you don't want it too cold. If it is cold, it will still rise. It will just take longer to do so, all right? So I usually go lukewarm, somewhere around 95 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit. And we just get that into the water. And basically, we just want to get it where it's starting to foam, and we know it's working. Simple. So we put that aside. Ooh, nice and sexy. Now, we're a little ahead of ourselves. We're going to all sample this now later. So this turns into this. We're going to show you how to do that. Next, I always like to put all my dry together, except for salt. Salt always, a lot of people just throw it all in and think it's fine. But the thing about salt is it's a retardant. It stops yeast from feeding and giving off, its carbon dioxide. So we don't want to make salt come in contact with that. So we're going to add the salt right at the very end as the last ingredient when everything else has come together, okay? Another thing with bread is, so we'll just put the salt aside. Another thing with bread is that you can add as much fat to it as you want. That makes it more moist. It makes it stay fresher longer, and it's just downright, delicious. Fat, butter, eggs, all that goodness, But that's not necessary for a bread, however. So those are our wet ingredients. So I'm going to add the sugar to my flour. So in this recipe, we've got milk is our liquid, butter, eggs, and a little bit of water with our yeast. And then our dry is our flour, sugar, and our potato. Okay? So again, just to reiterate the simplicity of the ingredients, nothing here is overwhelming, nothing here is intimidating. It's just flour in a bowl with a little bit of sugar. And when you're combining wet ingredients to dry ingredients, that's another thing too. The active, quick stuff, I recommend stay away from. You know, go with the traditional, let you take your time, do it right. You know, that stuff is more, so that's what I suggest, okay? You don't have to follow it, it's a tip. So you guys would prefer me to do this in the KitchenAid mixer, which is completely fine. If I was to do it by hand, what you want to do is you can't go backwards with bread. And what I mean by that is, if you put too much flour and not enough water, you can't just add more water. All right? But if it's too wet, you can always add more flour. So just keep that in mind, because one thing about bread, it's about feel. It really is. The temperature of your room, the humidity, it will affect how much water and how much. So that's where you always want to have that feel. A little bit of flour, and feel it out. So if I was going to mix this by hand, I would now take this flour here, and I would slowly add that to my wet. And I wouldn't dump it all in at one time. I'd probably do 2/3, get that mixed in, and then the last little bit, and feel it out, and the last little bit, so I don't put too much flour in there, and then I can't go backwards. It's just a waste, right? It happens. It happens. So in this case, we're going to get all of our wet into the bowl, and then we'll slowly start add that. So we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to let the mixer do the work. So milk into the bowl. Now, I know you guys probably can't see that, but I'm limited to my extension cord. So little adjustments here in the first demo, guys. Can you see that? Everyone see that? Okay. Okay, I'm hooked in there, hooked in. Everyone hear me? Great. Okay. So you got your mixer, so we're going to throw our eggs in. So basically what this is going to yield. Oh, thanks, buddy. He's my chef. He's got my back. I got another creeper in the back in the corner there staring at me. He's another one of my chefs. So we'll throw the eggs in. So in this case, what we've got here is 3 cups of milk, okay, 2 eggs, butter. Now the guys back there melted the butter for me, but you definitely do not have to melt that butter. And another thing, you want to be careful melting butter too, because not so much with bread, but if you're doing something that you need to be aerated, it's best not to melt your butter. But okay, so I got my milk, my eggs, my butter, and now I'm going to add my potato. So we got about 2 cups of potato here. Get that in there. So it's quite a bit of potato. You can certainly taste it. You can certainly get a sense of it in the bread. So I've got my dry again, and my salt. So as I said before, the salt is the very last thing to go in. Flour, sugar, milk, potato, butter, eggs, and now you can see it's just starting to foam. So it's not all foam. If I let this go, it'll continue to foam and continue to foam and continue to foam. But basically what you're looking for is, has it started? So as soon as you see foam, you know it's working. So you can go ahead and start using that. But I strongly recommend you wait for a bit of foam. Now, as I said, that traditional stuff, it took no time. Minute, 2 minutes. That active stuff, that quick stuff, that's really not saving you any time. It's just compromising your end result, in my opinion. The price is no different on that stuff, so I would just recommend you go with that. So we're just going to throw that right in. And with a little bit of potato in there, I'm just going to let that kind of come together. So as I said before, all my wet ingredients are in there, and I want to start putting in the flour, but I don't want to just dump it in because it's risky. So I'll slowly start adding it in. So I like to start with 2/3. It's kind of a safe amount. You know you're going to be okay. And the other thing I like to do is when you're using a KitchenAid mixer, you really want to go on a lower speed to start. Right? It's almost too high. That's perfect there. Just until you make kind of like a soupy mix. You know what I mean? Where it's still wet, it's still liquidy. And then what you do is when you add your last bit of flour, you got to turn that speed up. And the reason you got to turn it up, because if you don't, there's not enough power to actually mix the flour into the water and the other wet ingredients. And what you get is a really kind of clumpy, not well-mixed bread. You know, it should be smooth, and it should be, you know, it should have a really good feel to it. And if you don't put it on a high speed with too much flour, it literally won't mix. So on the bottom of the bowl, you'll have a lot of flour that's not incorporated back up in your bread. This is the way to avoid it. A little bit of patience, step by step by step. So as you can see, there's definitely lots of flour in there, but it's very wet, right? That's very, very wet. And just to illustrate that point, you know, it's wet, right? Okay? So as we get that last bit of flour in, it is imperative that you put that speed up, okay? And here we go. And you know, when you're making bread, you got to make a mess. Got to be flour everywhere. It's just the name of the game. But you know what? It's part of it. All right, so I'm just going to now be a little bit hesitant. So the last little bit of my flour according to my recipe, which was 8 cups, by the way, I'm going to put that speed up to a strength that I know is strong enough to beat it. And that looks pretty good there. So now what's going to happen is it's going to come together, and then I can gauge its tackiness, and I can finish adding that flour a little bit, right? Everyone see that? Now you can do this by hand. I'm using a KitchenAid, but the batch that I made here was all done by hand. It was too big to fit in this. So you do not need an expensive piece of equipment to do this at home. You do need a little bit of effort, right? You got to work it, but that's part of it. It teaches you about feel, teaches you about the bread changing as you're kneading it in. So I can see that that's still pretty wet, right? So I think I'm safe, based on gauging it, to kind of go most of it, all right? And at this point, because the butter and the fat and the bread and the water have all brought together, molecular changes are happening within there, so the yeast is protected. So this is the time you want your salt. So we're just going to throw a couple of teaspoons of salt in there, and now we know that the yeast that we put in there is actually going to be alive, and it's going to rise the bread, and it's going to work. You may find yourself at home and go, the bread's just not rising quick enough. Part of the reason may be that your yeast didn't, you didn't let it foam long enough, or you killed it with your salt, Yeast is a living thing. Bread is a living thing. It's alive. Once you give it food and sugar and water, it starts to come to life. It's a fascinating ingredient. So I'm going to throw the rest of that flour in. Now, if I had that at a lower speed, we'd have a total mess on our hands. The flour just wouldn't be incorporating in, and that's replicating that kneading process. And that's where you really got to put in that effort to work. Okay. So we're almost ready to take this out of the bowl, and then I'm going to show you a couple of kneading techniques to finish it, and then we'll talk about finishing, and then we'll sample. All right, that is looking pretty sexy, not going to lie, but it is still a little bit wet. So we'll just stop that now. And as you can see, it's really wet. And can you guys feel humidity in this room? I don't know, I can't. Maybe it's just come on stage. But it will affect how much flour is needed. So sometimes when you're thinking about recipes, you like that? Semi-controlled, you will have to develop that feel, what's right, and wet is not good. You want it to be firm, you want it to be tight. And when you're working bread, that's what you're doing. The tightening comes from activating gluten. So as you work it, the gluten's activating. So if you notice the bread really tough and you're having a hard time kneading it, let it sit for 5 minutes. And that gluten will relax a little bit, and then it'll allow you to knead a little easier. But you notice if I let that go now for a long time, that'll get so tough. And that's because we're just constantly creating those gluten strands. So be careful not to We didn't say we were going to do it clean. We just said we were going to do it. Okay, so I think we're good. So you can get a sense that it's come together. It's on that dough hook. It's definitely still wet, okay? But that's okay. So now you can see that on the bottom of my bowl, I don't have any dry flour, right? It's all actual bread. It's what I want, you know? So this is our bread. So once I finish kneading this, and it's going to need a little bit of flour, which is good because I'll be able to show both ways. So what you want to do here is a nice, you know, again, depending on feel. And what we're going to do is basically when a knead is knead and quarter turn. Right? Quarter turn. And as you knead, the wetness in the bread will come to the surface. And as that wetness slowly comes to the surface, you slowly keep adding a little bit more flour. All right, so knead, quarter turn, and you kind of just continue to do that until it kind of tightens right up. And this is starting to look really good now. And I could definitely work this more. But we're starting to get ourselves into a nice ball here. I said to myself, I'm going to wear gloves so I don't have to do this. Forgot gloves. Honesty is the name of the game here, guys. There's no... All right, so my hands are clean. And I can start working this a little bit more. And really, bread is that simple. Now, you can make bread with just flour, water, yeast, and salt if you want. But the thing about it is that bread needs to bake. And the longer it goes in the oven, the more fat it needs. It's not dry out. So, for example, if you've got a bread that's got no butter, no milk, no eggs, you've got to expect that bread to be drier. All right? Yeah, so did you just talk about pizza? Well, I tell you what, with pizza, the pizzas we make here, they take 20 minutes in the oven. So you call down to the shop and it takes 20 minutes to cook a pie, right? If you do a pizza pie like the Neapolitans or the Margaritas, they cook in a 900-degree oven. So that bread cooks in about 45 to 90 seconds. So if there's any fat in it, the fat's actually going to slow down the cooking, right? So then the dough is going to come out raw. But in our ovens at home, you're baking bread at 350, 400, 375 probably at most. You need fat in that bread. Otherwise, you're going to have to, you know, you're just going to let it cook for 20 minutes and it's going to be dry. You know, and, or it's going to be fresh, obviously, out of the oven, and then after an hour, you know, and then the next day. One thing about potato bread, especially this recipe, at least 5 days. At least 5 days of soft, fresh, delicious bread. But attribute it to the eggs, milk, butter, fat, sugar, right? Potato. All those things are really helping, you know, helping that bread come together. So here is my finished bread, what I would say is ready to go for rise. So what I'm going to do is, we're not actually going to eat this bread, but if anybody wants to come up and just get a feel for it, they can certainly come up and grab a piece of this and just get a sense of how it feels, if you're interested. Because, as I said, bread is all about feel, right? So now what we do is you want to get it into a bowl. You want to put that in a warm place, maybe cover with a tea towel. And what you want to do is let it double, all right? So it's going to double. It'll probably come, you know, to the edge of that. And once that's going to take in a warm spot around a half hour, maybe 40 minutes, depending on where you are in your environment. But the objective is to wait until it doubles in size. Let it do its thing, all right? Once it doubles in size, you have to beat it down. All bread is like that, this style of bread. So it's called a double proof, all right? So you proof it twice. So what we do, the flour everywhere. So when you double proof, this is your first proof, double in size. Then you dump it out and you weigh it into what you want to do. So let's imagine that this was doubled in size. So a half hour passed, the dough is doubled. Now you want to form it into loaves or rolls, right? So let me just take a uno momento and see if I can clear up some of this flour. I'll do it real quick, I promise. And you know, making bread at home, especially I've got a young niece, 4 years old. Bread is an engaging, involved process. It's something where if you're in the kitchen to make something for your family, to make bread, to make sandwiches, it's something that can get everyone involved, right? From the portioning to the weighing to the kneading. And kids love the feel of bread. They love the feel of dough. They love playing with it. And you know what? It just gets them involved. So it's a really great kind of activity to do. And then what you're left with is all this amazing fresh bread. And then you get to sit and enjoy it. And that's obviously hands down the best part. So if that was doubled in size and we take that down, basically if we wanted to make rolls like those, we'd weigh those out into, say, 100 grams, which is a general size for a decent sized roll. Those are a little bigger, maybe 115. So you just want to get your size down. So that's 100 there. So that would be one ball. And then basically this is the second proof. So the first proof rised, we dumped it out, we started weighing it. Now we're shaping it, and then we let it rise again. Okay? So we would tray those up on a tray in rolls. If you wanted to do bread and bread pan, you do it maybe 400 grams times 2. So you got the split one, like, well, that one looks a little weird. But you understand, the ovens we got back there are not the best. I'm not blaming the ovens, obviously, but, well, I am, I guess, technically. So, for example, if I wanted to do, loaves, it's usually around 4 times the size of a ball. Now, I like 100-gram size for a ball. I think it's a good weight for it. And then there's another thing that you can do when you're shaping it into a ball. This is something I like to do when I'm making pizza, is just kind of overlap your fingers and stretch the front of the, see how I'm doing that? And as I'm doing that, I'm pulling the surface of that bread. Yeah? You see that? So I'll just show you again, like, it's a little bit tacky because we're trying to rush this a little bit, but, so again, I'm just, a little bit of flour. So I'm just kind of crossing that over. See that? Just kind of pulling that surface. And then all you do is put that into a bread pan. Okay? So you'd have your 2 balls, same size.